You're watching 10 Tips for Becoming a Time Lord, produced by GP Supervision Australia and presented by Dr. Andrew Knight and Dr. Tony Lemke. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this recording was produced and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, future, and their families.
Welcome all, and it's a great pleasure to introduce our two speakers, one of whom I've known for many, many years in the educational space, and that's Dr. Andrew Knight, and many of you will know Andrew from his work with the old RTP of Wentwest. Andrew's been a GP for 30 years. He's been a director of training in the AGPT, as I said, chair of a division of PHN and NPS medicine-wise, so extensive background. Recently completed a PhD, which evaluated the Australian Primary Care Collaboratives Program, which, again, many of you might be aware of it or have been involved in. Andrew's now a staff specialist in the southwestern Sydney region, providing primary care for people with chronic, severe mental illness. And Andrew's joined tonight by Tony Lemke. Tony's a GP in Alstonville in northern New South Wales. He was the clinical director of the Australian Primary Care Collaboratives and was GP of the Year in 2012 through the RACGP, so a pretty strong endorsement of who he is. Strong interest in health IT, and he was the Sydney Uni Donkey Kong champion. Tony, that's a great thing to have been successful in. I think less so, he's an optimistic Wallaby supporter, so demonstrating some frailties there, and coach of the Lismore under-16 rugby team. But it is fabulous to have you both along. Great to have you finally around to address this really important topic of time management, how we can be better at time management as clinicians, but as importantly, how we can support that in our GP trainees. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Simon. So I'm Tony Lemke. As Simon said, I'm in Bundjalung country up in northern New South Wales. And Andrew and I had an opportunity to look into this subject in some detail when we were involved in the access component of the Primary Care's Collaboratives program. And that's what gives us a little bit of expertise in the topic. We wouldn't claim to be Time Lords ourselves, but we're going to talk to you about what we've learnt. Do your patients ever have to wait for you in your practice? I had a new patient come from a neighbouring town, a casino, and he said in his previous practice, he never waited for the GP for less than 3 hours and never saw him for more than 3 minutes. So general practice is busy. Waiting is somewhat par for the course. But Andrew, is waiting an important issue for patients, or are they just used to it?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Tony, because it is an important issue for patients. When we looked into this, really, it came from an idea of Tony's. He wrote a blog titled 10 Tips for Becoming a Time Lord, and we decided to write this up in an article, and I did look at the literature a little bit. And it was really interesting. There's a few studies on waiting, and it turns out it's probably the top thing that causes dissatisfaction with patients. So we don't realise that, I think, as GPs, how much it does bug people. For instance, there was one particular study, European study, 10 countries, and it showed that the thing that reduced satisfaction the most was the wait in the waiting room. And you and I, Tony, were recalling last time we spoke on this, a talk from the Productivity Commission, which said, the boss there said that actually waiting in GPs and specialists and ED caused a reduction of productivity of $1 billion at that time. So it's expensive as well. So we know that long waits they actually affect the consultation as well, because not only do they bug people, but they actually reduce satisfaction with the consultation when the people get in. So if they have a long wait and a short consultation, that's maximum dissatisfaction. Short wait, long consultation, more satisfaction. So the highest satisfaction, according to that study, was a short wait, less than 15 minutes, and a reasonable consultation length, more than 10 minutes. So I guess it's of personal interest to me because certainly early in my career, I regularly ran really late, like up to an hour late, and has all sorts of negative consequences. I think it is inevitable. It's part of general practice because unexpected things happen and you have to be able to respond. So that's actually part of the joy of general practice, is the unexpectedness. And I'm not saying we should always run on time. But if we are always running late, so every time you consult you're an hour late, then that is not due to surprises. It's due to a system problem. There's something about the way I was consulting, which meant that I always ran late. So yeah, I think it is really important. What about you, Tony?
In our surveys of our patients, Andrew, the main issue that they would raise is two things. One is the waiting time to get an appointment, how long it takes to get a routine appointment, where there's more demand than capacity. And the other thing is waiting time when they turn up for appointments. So if we can do something about either of those things, I think we should. But it's not only important, it doesn't just affect patients, Andrew, it affects us too. Is waiting time important for GPs, or should we just accept it?
Look, it was certainly important for me. I found it stressful, always apologizing all day and conscious that people were waiting and things going wrong and waiting even more. And so day after day, having a stressful day and being back late, getting home late because I'm finishing so late. So that affects my family life. I think waiting is a really important thing for our own quality of life. And also, it affects the functioning of the team because a lot of the strategies, conversations, delay at the front desk is due to the wait. If people were just flowing through on time, there's less notes, there's less managing of incidents by the staff. And so I think it affects a lot of our quality of life, but also our quality of care.
It affects the quality of life for the patients, quality of life for the GPs, and the quality of the work experience for the receptionists and other people who work in the practice. We'll try and think of some tips that may help us with this. There's nothing quite like being in the zone and running on time. The job then becomes the most enjoyable job in the world. You're chatting to your friends. But when you're starting each session each consultation with an apology and running late, it doesn't even feel like the best job in the building. So what can we do about that? There are some GPs, Andrew, and we call them Time Lords. They never seem to keep their patients waiting, and yet their patients don't feel rushed. I spent many years, the doctor in the room next to mine was Jimmy, and patients would go in and see him and come out a few minutes later, and I could hear them talking, and they would say, "Isn't he good, that Dr. Chu? I really felt that he listened to me, and he's so thorough." And how annoying do you think it is to be next to someone like that all the time? So Jimmy was a bit of a Time Lord. So we've had a look, Andrew, at some of the things that Time Lords do, and that's what we're going to share, some of these practical tips.
These are our personal experiences. They were developed to help our consulting and the people who are involved in the collaboratives and so on, other people.
So the first tip is called 15 minutes late does not mean that you're early. When I was the first young GP after finishing my fellowship, I did a locum for Dr. John in Lismore. He was from Manchester, very old school. So you'd do 4 or 5 house visits before you started at 9 o'clock, and then he booked 10-minute bookings with fit-ins on top of that. He had an allocated morning tea and lunch that he used to be able to take, but I clearly couldn't match that. I was usually an hour and a half late by mid-morning, and you get used to it. I got deconditioned to being late. And so if I saw someone and I was only 15 minutes late or even only 30 minutes late, I would pat myself on the back and think how well I'm doing. So perhaps running on time starts with a bit of a change in attitude, Andrew.
I think so. I think for me, this was really important. It's really important to our patients. Is it as important to us as it is to them? It means getting to work well before the first appointment. So if I'm turning up at 9 o'clock for my first appointment, that means I'm not starting seeing till 10 minutes. You've already lost 10 minutes, so you're already late. But I was talking to someone actually only a couple of weeks ago who said, I figure if I'm only 15 minutes late, they should be really grateful. And I think we really need to adjust that feeling, which is not to beat ourselves up for being late and saying, okay, it's not acceptable. The reality is we will be late at times, and we should accept that. But I think for me, it was a matter of changing my attitude to saying, I am planning to be on time. So I'll get there in time and ready to go at the first appointment. So it's an attitudinal thing. And I think it's something that we set for the practice overall as well. Is it a practice that attempts to run on time and acknowledges the importance of it to patients? And Tony, you've looked at this, haven't you? Starting times.
Starting times. So some of the practices that we worked with in the collaboratives, knowing that many doctors started late, started to track the doctor's starting time. So if your first appointment's at 9 o'clock, they would track what time they actually called the patient into the room. And sometimes the Hawthorne effect, by measuring something, you can cause change in it. So just measuring their starting times, they found led to a significant improvement in the doctors being aware of this issue, that only being 15 minutes late didn't mean that they were on time. So that's a quality improvement process you may like to think of implementing in your practice in a clinician-friendly way, of course.
Okay, so attitude change. I think it's really important.
Sometimes, Andrew, and you notice this, if I have to catch a plane at a certain time in the afternoon, so I have to be away at a certain time, I've never missed it. The attitude in that day is that I am going to run to time. And on those days, I'm often looking at my watch, waiting for the patient to turn up for their 1/4 appointment because I'm so focused on being on time. And that, I guess that's an example of what you mean by an attitude change. My attitude becomes one that I will run on time, and I manage to do so. Patients appreciate it when we respect their time, and being punctual is part of that. You remember the Canterbury Health System did a huge redevelopment of the way they delivered care many years ago, and they consulted the All Blacks and Air New Zealand and to come up with a slogan that would reinvigorate all their clinicians and workers within the Canterbury Health System in New Zealand. And after all of that, they came up with the slogan, "Don't waste people's time." And that became the driving force of the Canterbury Health System. I thought that was an interesting attitude change.
I suppose in terms of teaching, registrars absorb the culture of the practice. If they see that it's important for the practice that we run on time in the main, and it's an important priority, I think they do absorb that and they see the way we behave. If they see us arriving 15 minutes late, they get the picture.
Two, Andrew, is an extension of that, doing the warm-up.
Yep, this was one of mine too. I worked out that I was just wasting time doing stuff during the day. So, when you get there, can you hit the ground running? Is your desk tidy? Is the computer on? Like sometimes it takes a while for the computer just to log in and to open the software. Have you looked at the appointment diary to see what's coming up? And I got to the point of realizing if I waste 30 seconds in every consultation, then what's that? So it's a half a minute over 30 consultations. I'm a consultation late. I'm 15 minutes just from wasting 30 seconds throughout the day. So check that there's script paper in the script bin. Check that you've got otoscope tips. If you want a jug of water, is it there and full? Have you got enough alcohol swabs? And I actually got to the point of having everything so it was in reach. So I didn't have to stand up and go over to the cupboard and get it out if it was something that I used often. So it was a bit of a time and motion study to try and make sure that wasn't the thing that made me late. One of the things that I did also, you've probably done this, was to make sure that my letters printed with, when I was printing letters, that the address of the specialist was in a window. So I got window envelopes and the address was in the window. So that when I folded it up and put it in, it was perfectly placed. I just give them the envelope. I don't have to then write. I saved the whole writing of the name of the doctor on the envelope. So I don't know if you still print letters, but that's one thing that I did. Shared antenatal care protocol. I was always looking for it. Where is it? I've forgotten it. Where is it? So I just made sure that was available. So getting ready, I think that's it. Do the warm up, ready to go.
And you can outsource that, Andrew. So some practices, standard setting up of the desk, standard setting up equipment in every room, and their staff ensure before the day's consultations begin that the rooms are set to their standard with all the equipment that's required in the standard place.
Yep, that's right. Now, the next one is a big one. It's probably bigger in some ways. It's big and small. And I reckon you're a bit of an expert on this one, Tony. Working the diary. What do we mean by that? Your thoughts?
Many practices, when we looked at appointment systems in some detail, Andrew, many practices work on the supersaturate theory. That is, they start the day fully booked and they supersaturate by fitting people in when they ring up for an acute need. And in our practice, it used to be on every Monday, look at all these people. Why are they ringing on Mondays? Don't they know that Monday is a busy day? And we would blame the receptionists for having too many people to fit in. When in fact, it turns out that the demand for acute places in a general practice is very predictable. You can count them, and every Monday or every Tuesday will be almost exactly the same on a week-by-week basis. So in our practice, we know that there are going to be, amongst all our doctors, 54 patients ring up on a Monday for an appointment, about 32 on a Tuesday. So it varies day. Monday's always the worst. But we don't act surprised every Monday now when people ring up requesting an acute appointment. So it's about changing some of the systems that we use to accommodate that. So urgent patient needs are predictable. It's not unexpected, and you can't really fit in or double booking without having consequence for that. The rough rule of thumb that we established was about 30% of appointments on any particular day would be taken up by patients ringing up for an acute urgent case. By recognising that in advance and working your diary to allow for that, it enables you to not have this supersaturate situation. You can see the patients who need to be seen in a timely way without having your day ruined by acute appointments coming along.
Well, it's absolutely what I did. I was just block out, make sure I started the day with 30% of appointments blocked out. The day could be filled on the day, and I found that stopped me getting the squeeze in or the double booking, because to squeeze there, you cannot squeeze time and you cannot double book time unless you truly are a time lord. And it's funny we use those terms, but this person's a squeeze in, but there's no extra time to squeeze someone in. This is actually a big topic that we've actually written extensively on, the different appointment systems you can have. And if you look at the article in the AGGP of the 10 tips for becoming a time lord, you'll see some of the references there. If you're interested in understanding your appointment system a bit more, Tony's done a lot of work on this. You can count demand, you can match your demand to the capacity, you can actually shape the demand, you can actually shape your capacity by making sure that you don't book routine follow-ups on a Monday, for instance, or when people are away on holidays, you change the things that can be booked at that time. Tony's done an amazing system at Alstonville where you've actually divided the streams, I think, Tony, from acute and chronic disease.
We think there's different patient value streams. So what do patients value? So patients who ring up on the day value the fact that our practice is willing to accommodate and see them. And we will see anyone who rings up and thinks that they need to be seen on the day, because we know how many people are going to ring up. So we leave that many spots. They value being seen. They may have to wait a long time, but they only rang up that day. So they're more accepting of that. That's their value stream. And they may not see their usual doctor. It may be the on-call doctor that we have. But again, they've only rung up that day. So their values are different. Patients in the routine stream have booked usually some time ahead to see the doctor of their choice. They've made arrangements to be there at a certain time, some time ahead. They may have arranged a lift or transport. So they value being seen in a timely way at about the time that they arranged by the doctor that they arranged to see. So there are different patient value streams that are reflected in between acute appointments and routine appointments. There's also a chronic disease value stream where we value bringing people in every 3 months or every 6 months for proactive and systematic chronic disease management. So that's the third stream, and we handle them in a completely different way. But by identifying what the patients value, you can ensure that those in the routine stream who value being seen at the right time in a timely way can be seen that way. If I'm not the on-call doctor, then I can dedicate myself to the patients who've booked in, and the on-call doctor will be managing the acute load rather than being fitted in with me. So that's more of a whole of practice approach. But if you're just in an individual, if you're not able to do that as a whole of practice, starting to measure or count the demand for acute appointments on any particular day and starting to leave an adequate amount of slots in your appointment system that can't be filled until that day, I think you found, Andrew, that made life significantly less stressful.
Yep. And I gave permission for the staff to just book them. From 9 o'clock when I started working, they could fit them in, and they knew. I mean, I guess it is a team game, all of this. And the reception staff, once you get to understand what you want, they'll book people appropriately and talk with you if necessary. And it worked out really well doing the 30% rule. It's a rough heuristic and a lot of people use it.
Tony and Andrew, do you triage these patients? I mean, do you have a sense of acuity? How did you get this data? Was it a simple matter of counting? And also, do you apply this to registrars, Tony, particularly this model of 30%?
We obviously don't triage the patients except to the extent that they are asked whether it's an urgent thing. Do they need to see the doctor that day? So the receptionists don't get into how long they had the chest pain and what part of the chest is it in and does it go down their arm. If the patients feel a need, and that might be a mental health need or an acute, we don't know until they turn up what that need is. So that's our definition, and people have different ways of doing that, but that's our definition of acute need in our practice. And we counted them, first of all, to find out how many people rang up when we first started doing it. So now we know, and we watch it quite closely, and if the numbers are going up or down, then we will change the number of blocked out appointments we leave for acute appointments.
And if you're interested in this and interested in counting and really understanding your demand, and it's usually practices that are overwhelmed, so if you're in a rural area or urban fringe where you've got so much demand you can't cope with, people do get interested in managing their demand. We've written a few articles that are referenced that you can actually read those, and it goes into some detail on how you might do it. I'm happy to talk more if that would be helpful. We were very enthusiastic and interested in this at one point, and it has been helpful, very helpful, but also being simple, 30% also seems to work quite well. But you can get a lot more technical with it.
You know, obviously as supervisors supporting registrar, exposure to patients and making sure they're seeing enough but not being overwhelmed. Do you have a similar framework? Does it work for your
It works
trainees
beautifully
in the
for
practice?
registrars, Simon. So we have, particularly when the registrars are first starting their term, there'll be the on-call doctor and they'll share the list. It's like central queuing.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
patients who have been booked in, we know how many there will be. They're put in
Yeah.
a central queue, and either the doctor on call or the registrar will take the next one when they're ready to do so, so that when the patients ring up in the morning, we'll say, come up at 10, come up at 11, come up at 12. We try and disperse them through the day. But then the registrars can work at their own pace, particularly when they start out, and spend as much time as they feel they need with the patients, because the next person in the queue will be taken by either one or two of the other doctors. And as registrars build up their own clientele base or start reviewing the patient base or start reviewing patients, then they'll have less on-call time and more routine time dedicated to them. So we think that works well for our registrars.
What I would say is it's really important to discuss these sorts of things with registrars, how you do general practice, not just what you do.
Have to be wasted time. So wait the wait means, can we add value to the waiting time? And this includes things like practice nurses performing preliminary tasks like taking the patient's blood pressure, or if it's appropriate, collecting urine samples, or preparing the request forms, or giving patients information to read, or surveys to fill out, or we want to make the waiting time more productive, which makes the wait feel shorter for patients, but also, if done properly, can save time during the consultation. Nurses are very good at being systematic at approaching these issues. So can they deal with any preventative health issues, such as diabetes tests or screening tests, if that's what the patient's due for? And so engaging patients during their wait is a way of enhancing their understanding and involvement in their care. On our acute days, the patients will be seen by a nurse when they turn up, who will do their blood pressure and get a brief history, so that by the time I see the patient, they may have a history of dysuria, and the patient will be at the desk with urinalysis performed and the specimen ready to go and the pathology form printed out. The nurses don't print the antibiotic yet, but that may remain my only job in the situation, examining the patient. But the patients like the fact that I think that things are moving, that even though they're waiting, that things are moving along, that they are getting engagement with the practice. So that's a big advantage. And then it speeds up my consultation time, so I can spend more time, and we'll talk about this, spend more time doing the important relationship building things with the patient, if some of that waiting time is used appropriately.
So we've done the preparation. We're now into consulting. How can you make consulting be more time efficient? First thing is, at the beginning of the consultation, this one was mine, I think, the golden minute, that first beginning. A lot of people thinking about consulting realize that the beginning of the consult is really important for creating trust, for you preparing yourself even before the patient comes in. So neighbours' idea of doing your housekeeping. These guys think about the possibility of doing a 10-minute meditation before someone comes in. Just clearing your mind, getting yourself ready so you're ready to go before people come in, and then having those non-verbal cues ready to go. Eye contact, warm tone, smile, body posture, knowing their name. So it can be a good investment to maximize the effectiveness of the consultation so that you appear focused, not rushed. That's what a Time Lord's like. Okay, so that's one.
Well, it's important, Andrew, that 10-second meditation is, each patient we need to focus on, make them feel important and special in their own right. And so you want to use that 10 seconds to finish your thinking around the last patient, and then focus on what are the needs of this patient. How can we make their life better and more meaningful and richer, so that it's off and then on again, ready for the next patient. So we're focusing on one at a time. I think it's very important.
Yep.
The next one, Andrew, is about probably the most important tip, and one that our registrars initially struggle with, and one that we spend a lot of time teaching them about, and that's about getting the patient's agenda.
So this contains 3 tips that it took me like 20 years to work out. So you're ready? This is my golden nuggets. The first one is get the agenda at the beginning. This was something that I learnt from Michael Greco, who used to run a company up in Brisbane that was really good on analysing consultations and helping us analyse our consultations. And the idea is that you deal with all the issues, and then just when the person's hand's on the door, they bring up another issue. And that does happen. And the point is that, first of all, keep silent when the consultation begins. Again, a Roger Neighbour tip, to just keep completely silent when the patient sits down and let them talk. You may have heard this as supervisors. It's common knowledge amongst supervisors as we teach consultation skills. There's a tendency to panic and think the patient will talk forever, but they don't. The studies say they'll probably stop talking within 60 seconds, and almost everyone stops talking by 150 seconds. And then they've told you what's really important to them. You know, the idea of the rehearsal, they're rehearsing what they want to say to the doctor. If you interrupt them, they forget to say something. They forget to mention they're already on a blood thinner, or they have atrial fibrillation, and that might explain why they've got, you know, these neurological symptoms. Whereas if you let them talk, they will tell you. I just did it this week. I just practiced it again with another patient, and he just kept talking. He told me so many valuable things that was really efficient. So keeping quiet at the beginning is really important. Then another colleague gave me the second tip, which is he asks, is there anything else 3 times? So is there anything else? They tell you something more. So, well, okay, great. Now, is there anything else? A bit more. Anything else? Finally, there's nothing. So you think you've got the whole agenda. You've done your level best to get the whole agenda out. So those are the first 2 tips. I've heard people complain about patients who bring a list. I actually love patients who bring a list because they thought about what they want, and I can get the list, and then I'm in control. I know what's going on, and I can actually use that list to help really meet the patient's need. They're satisfied, and I can be more efficient. So I like the list. But the other next strategy is one that also Michael Greco gave me, which really changed my consulting. I knew about getting the agenda. I knew about getting the 8 items. But the key question was, they've got the 8 things. Now, of these things, what's most important to you? What do you not want to leave here today without us having talked about? So you get the patient to prioritize the agenda. And then you know what's really important to them. Now, it is also true that we have our own agenda. So the patient says, you know, I really, really want to get my driving medical done, or otherwise I won't be able to drive. It's like, okay, that's important to you. But I'm really concerned about the fact that you've noticed a bit of black bowel motions, and I think we really need to deal with that. So of course we have our own agenda, and we put the importance of what we think is important on the 8 issues. But this enables us to become more patient-centered in what we do. We can meet the pressing need, and we can confidently plan and postpone the less urgent issues. And in fact, often you can deal with a lot of the things really quickly. Once you know where they are, you can give them the appropriate amount of time, get things done quickly, and deal with the important issues. So this really changed my consulting style. It did help to stop that ping-ponging. So you deal with an issue, you deal with it thoroughly. Oh, there's another issue. Oh, I didn't realize. Then you deal with that thoroughly. Oh, there's another one. So the consultations for me were extending and extending and extending. By getting the full agenda out first, I could deal with the things appropriately up front. And I found my whole consultation momentum worked. I got the agenda out first. I checked, I did, whatever I needed, questions I needed to ask. I did the examination. We did what I thought was going on. I checked with them what they thought. We did what needed to be done, and then they're gone. That momentum in and then the momentum out, rather than back and forth with lots of issues. So that was life-changing for me and really helped me to be much quicker in my consulting.
I think that question, Andrew, is there anything else, said in an open way, welcoming other things, not is there anything else, rolling your eyes, but is there anything else in a welcoming way, asking them to come on board? Because there's nothing worse than spending 10 minutes trying to drag out a consultation about a mole that they've shown you, that's the seborrheic keratosis, and then say, well, what I'm really here about. You think, oh no, I've just wasted 10 minutes on the mole, and they're really here to tell me about a significant mental health issue or a relationship issue. Or so that can take a while to build up their trust, to tell you that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
But is there anything else in a welcoming, friendly way saves you enormous amounts of time? And it sounds risky. It sounds counterintuitive. It sounds risky to keep asking them, is there anything else? But if you don't ask it, you're going to keep falling for that trap that we all fall for all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you don't just use those formulaic words. You say, I've got the medication we need to do. I've got your driving medical. You mentioned the bowel motions. Now, I just want to check. There's nothing else that you want to talk about today? Shall we go on? Oh, yes, this. Okay, that. Okay. Now just check. So we've got this and this. Anything else? It really does get that agenda and stops. That was one of your questions. How do you avoid the bombshell with the hand on the door? I think that really changes it. It will still happen because that's human nature, but it reduces it.
Yes, and sometimes you're going to fall for it, Andrew. So you are going to be stuck. You are going to run late because then after 15 minutes, something will come up and unavoidably so. So we're not saying this is an answer for everything, but it helps often.
And which brings us to the next one, Tony. A really important principle, this one, and quite counterintuitive too for some. Max packing. What is max packing?
Max packing, Andrew, is about doing today's work today. So when you have a patient's list and you've established what the agenda is, try and do as much as you can in the visit. Once you know the agenda, you can allocate in your mind how much time to spend on each thing. So you can look at the mole very quickly and move through their list onto the important things. Work expands to fill the amount of time available to do it sometimes. There was a study, a program in Canada you told me about, Andrew, where they said each patient in their general practice can only mention one complaint. What did you think of that one?
It was literally a program. They said, "Oh, we're running late. We're going to make a rule. You can only deal with one issue when you go to the GP." And so I just think it's disastrous because what does that do? If there's two issues, it means there's coming back tomorrow or next week. And so it just soaks up all your capacity in the future and drives patients mad. Whereas if you do today's work today, you try and deal with as much as you possibly can today to preserve tomorrow's capacity. But you have to be reasonable about the time that you've got as well. You can't privilege this patient over the next patient by doing everything.
And there's a patient-centered way of when you've established the agenda and what you're going to deal with today, if there really is inappropriate to do the whole list, in my advice would be never say, look, I don't have time to do that for you today because there's all these other people waiting. Patients hear that as they're not important to you. There's two things. There's one, you can often get the wheels in motion before a return visit, ordering pathology or x-rays or doing a headache diary. And then you'd say, look, we're going to deal with these three today, and these three are really important. They will need full and thorough attention. So at the end of the consultation, I'll come with you down to the reception desk and we'll book a return visit to deal with those three things. They're very important. So we need to deal with them in a thorough way. So maintaining, I have heard registrars and other doctors saying, look, that's all, we don't have time for any more, you'll have to come back. Patients hear that in the way that it is meant. It's about truly wanting to do a good job and getting them back if you can't max pack it. One quick thing about max packing, Andrew, what do you think about leaving? Registrars often will leave all their notes because you want to have, the motto is out the drive by 5:30. You want to finish the day with the last consultation. And I think it's a good principle to do the work you're going to do for that patient while they're there so they see the value in what you're doing. If you do all the referral letters and write their notes up after they've gone, that's invisible to them and they don't see the value of that. So this sounds like a counterintuitive thing to what we've been saying about running on time. But really, I want the registrars to have it finished when the patient walks out the door, not to save it the later. And at the speed they type, my typing looked like a dyslexic rat walked across the keyboard, but the speed which the registrars and the younger doctors type is amazing, and they need to be doing it while the patient's there, in my opinion. Is that what you tell your registrars, Andrew?
Yes.
The red zone, Andrew, is another concept, similar. The value in general practice is the relationship that's developed between the doctor and the practice nurses and the patient. And anything else, according to Mark Murray, the doyen of Access, is wasting time. The outcome is that all of my patients are going to die. What I can offer them is a good relationship when they come and see me. And things that deter from that relationship, that's the red zone, that time talking and listening and seeing and hearing your patient, and everything else is wasting time. That's walking up and down the corridor, going around looking for equipment, looking for the cryotherapy, getting interrupted. So the red zone, the doctors are the rate determining step and running on time, and the whole of practice needs to be revolving around keeping the doctor in the red zone so that they can really deliver excellent patient-centered care when the patient's there. Part of that is focus, part of that is delegating inappropriate tasks, some of that is being prepared, doing the warm-up at the start of the day. And you mentioned before, but if you spend 2 minutes outside the red zone in each consultation extra, that means you're going to be an hour late by the end of the day and you won't be able to drive by 5:30. Sometimes team huddles at the beginning of the day can be helpful. You can say, look, team, nurse, receptionist, we've got Christian coming in today. She always runs over time. I want the nurses to grab her at the start, help fulfill her concerns. We want to try and speed things up, keep the doctor in the red zone, utilising the whole team around that. The other part of that is reducing interruptions and inefficiencies, and you can develop systems in place to do that, particularly when you're supervising. We have students and registrars at our practice. We've had them for 30 years. If you're the supervisor, you can anticipate that you're going to be interrupted. We worry about registrars who never interrupt us, in fact. We want them to be asking questions. But that can take you out of the red zone. So we've got a system whereby the nurses, if they need me, slide a laminated A4 under the door, which is nurses' room. The registrars, if they need me, can slide a laminated A4 under the door saying that they need to see me. So that when I leave the consultation, I can't help but fall over them as I walk out the door. It means that they're not hovering around waiting for me to open the door to come out. They can go in and do their work because they know that put that under the door, I will turn up. So you can come up with your other own systems to help keep the doctors in the red zone.
We use chats too with the registrars. I could ask questions that way.
Andrew, is the important point about engaging and harnessing the patient in your need to run on time.
Yep. So this is a big one for me. When I was first looking at this, I went through this process where we identified problems with our practice, and someone did the 5 whys to me. I don't know if you've ever used the 5 whys, but it's when you ask a question, you ask why 5 times to try and get the answer as to why a problem is occurring. So my problem was that I always ran late. I was talking to someone and they asked me why. I said, well, they just go too long. Why do they go too long? Well, we keep talking too long. The talk goes on. Why does the talk go too long? Well, I think I find it hard to end a consultation. Why is it hard to end a consultation? It seems rude, I think. It seems like I'm interrupting people. Anyway, the net result was we invented this thing called the 12-minute slip. And this is it. It's written there. What it says is a little piece of paper that I gave to everyone for 2 weeks. And on it said, you may have noticed we often run late. Being late's annoying for patients and stressful for staff. We're keen to address our continual lateness. One of the problems is our consultations are running over time. Just 4 minutes extra per consultation means the doctor's an hour late at the end of the morning. You can help by being aware your time with the doctor will be about 12 minutes. Being understanding if the doctor suggests you come back to address remaining issues, and organising a list of issues you wish to cover before you go in. Please return the slip to the receptionist when you've read it. So we did that for 2 weeks, and it did reduce my lateness by 50%. It was the most effective thing I did, and I found that patients would say to me about 12 minutes, Andrew, it's 12 minutes, I think we'd better finish. Instead of me having trouble interrupting them, they're interrupting me. So it doesn't work for everyone, and I certainly don't want to be rude as though patients aren't being thoughtless by going too long. They just don't know how long a consultation is because we never told them. That was a really helpful thing to me. So I think training patients to understand, or helping patients understand how long the consultation is, and helping you to plan to be on time, harnessing their understanding is really helpful. That really, really worked well for me. And the last tip, Tony, is truth in advertising. This is your tip, and I like this tip. What do you mean by truth in advertising?
Well, sometimes you've got to dance with who you brung. Always you have to dance with who you brung, Andrew. So this is about aligning our scheduling with reality. There's a cardiologist who visits Lismore who runs hours late, and the patients ring up and say, what time should I come in today? They say, well, your appointment's at 2, so you should come at 4:30. And then the patients come at 4:30. So truth in advertising would be if they'd told the patient the appointment time was 4:30 in the first place. I don't know why they go through this charade of booking the patient for 2 when they know the doctor will turn up late and run very late. We're all guilty of doing that a bit. We need to, if we've tried all the other strategies, sometimes we need to accept our natural consulting rhythm and plan accordingly. And so, for example, we can check what time we normally see our 3 p.m. patient. And if it's normally 3:30, then we can change the appointment booking schedule to acknowledge that. So instead of having a 3 o'clock appointment, you block it out so that no one can take it. You might have to block out another appointment. And so no one is actually booked in for 3 o'clock. They're booked in for 3:30. And it's spread. So the 4:30 patient who would have been seen at 5:30 is told to come at 5:30. It involves working your diary and putting blocked appointments in during the day. We do that with our registrars when they start. So they might just see 2 an hour instead of 4 an hour for the first bit. But some of us never get much beyond that sort of pace, and we need to accept that reality. We shouldn't and can't all work at the same pace, and therefore truth in advertising, once we've done everything else, is a very appropriate way of managing lateness. Look, it's especially important if you're supervising registrars or students and know that they're going to hold you up on days when that's the case, that you put in extra blocked appointments to allow for that. So the patients aren't the ones suffering, that they know what time they're going to be seen. There was a question before about different arrangements for female doctors and male doctors and how can we account for the different ways they practice. And in our practice, the most efficient doctors are Emily and Annika, who always seem to run on time and the patients love them and they're very thorough. And the least efficient doctors are Mark and Michael. It's more about your natural style and pace. So we all need to acknowledge our consulting style, our ability to control the pace of our consultations, and to recognize that and have some truth in advertising. It reduces stress for us if our patients haven't been waiting for a long time, and it acknowledges and respects the patients better.
Yep. So those are 10 tips. They've helped us. They're sort of the distillation of our experience in thinking about this.
There was a mention of somebody having a notice on the wall regarding the duration of the consultation, sort of saying this is what's standard. And that being, I guess, a constant reminder to patients to have an expectation about what works, I guess similar to your letter. I remember coming across a paper years and years ago which flagged the use of the word something rather than anything. So it looked at whether GP should say, is there something else that you'd like to talk about? And there was a very small little study, but the conclusion was it meant that the person, instead of saying, oh, gosh, yeah, while I'm here, I could talk about my, back, which has been bothersome for 40 years, rather than, no, actually, the something is my erectile dysfunction or my work stress. And we had an interesting comment about somebody whose patients decline handing over the list because if they keep it, they've got power. And I thought that was an interesting, this sort of mental image of a bit of a tug of war over this piece of paper. But there was a question about the digital tools such as Better Consult and AI dictation. Somebody did mention that AI has really made their consultations more efficient and freed up some time. Would either of you like to comment on that?
So there's a couple of issues and benefits of that, Simon. I've tested out Lyrebird and some of the other tools, and we use some AI tools in our practice. I chose not to use it. I think I quite like listening to the patient and then taking a note myself. It gives me time to think and collate and work out my plan for that patient. And I like that bit of thinking time that it gives me in the consultation.
Yep.
And I think with the speed with which the younger doctors type, that it's not such an issue for them anyway. But it is amazing technology where it takes out the extraneous conversation and breaks the record up into subjective, objective assessment and plan, and
Yep.
Really, really fascinating stuff. I'm a bit concerned about it being sent off-site. That's a privacy issue, but undoubtedly many people find it useful, and I think that'll be an interesting aspect of consultation taking going forward.
A Better Consult tool. I mean, my own GP uses that. I think it's a very interesting tool, and I think it would be an opportunity to, for instance, give people information about how long the consultation is. And also, it does take advantage of the wait. So these things are useful and interesting.
How might you apply some of this to registrar teaching and support? I mean, these are great tips. I imagine you'd be keen for supervisors to, in an appropriate way, discuss these, how they manage time. Are there any tricks around when to start talking to registrars, how to balance their learning needs with some of the things you've talked about?
I think it's something you start immediately, Simon, particularly capturing the agenda and working on that patient-centered focus to the consultation.
Yep.
Registrars often struggle at first in focusing on the issues that the patient has arisen and developing management plans on the fly to make their consultations flow in a more logical way. And the registers that I think we've really failed over the years have been ones who never really learnt the time skills, because it's such a frustration in general practice if you can't see people in a reasonable time. And I worry about them. I notice them sitting for long times in between patients quietly, and I presume that's not because they're trying to be late, but because they're dealing with some of the stressors that they're feeling. And so I think it's really hard being a GP, but it's hard being a registrar and learning these skills. But it's such an important part of what we offer them in the training program. I'm not trying to teach them how to manage migraines. I'm trying to teach them how to manage consultations. So I think it comes right up front.
I think we need to be aware of how much they learn from the hidden agenda, the culture that they pick up, or the things they pick up from us in our attitudes and what we see as important. Also, I think that consultation skills are really, I remember being a registrar and going round and round in circles in consultations and just being very disorganized. So learning to organize your consultations well with a beginning and a middle and an end, and it will help them with time management. It'll also help them with their communication, help with patient satisfaction, help them to be safe. It just helps with everything. So I think that all fits together.
Yeah.
Direct observation of the registrar sitting in with the supervisor is always a great teaching tool, because you can demonstrate and role model how to do some of these things. Because talking about it's one thing, but explaining it and seeing it done, hopefully by someone who's done it many times before, is always a good teaching tool.
Yeah, and I think with that, it's very explicit. You're going to watch me here, but this isn't about managing this particular condition or even communication skills. It's try to observe what I'm doing from a time management perspective, and we'll talk about it. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yep. Thank you.
I think in terms of the practice team, we this year have started employing a medical assistant. So we run GP, VMO, we also run the local hospital, and having a medical assistant for the on-call doctor who does the vitals and the histories of all the acute patients. And when we're off-site at the hospital, can be running through and getting basic urgency and basic sort of lists done has been fantastic for patients and has streamlined things a lot for us. As you said, like practice nurses have got huge skills in terms of streamlining chronic disease consultations. And tonight we just had a sort of big meeting with the practice nurses, sort of nutting out how is this going to flow best to actually look at, because often we use them to do paperwork and then they're sort of interrupting us to sign things off for Medicare, and looking at flipping that the other way, because one of the biggest things that wastes time as well, I think, which we underestimate, is the number of interruptions we get. So having systems like things underneath the door to minimize the red zone stuff. There's lots of different messaging platforms you can use, lots of different ways you can do that, but looking at minimizing interruptions is huge, and where things can be directed to nurses first, that's ideal.
Thanks.
I found that I see my patients record the day before because we are booked, it's not walk-in. And even if 1 minute before the patient comes, so if I haven't seen them before and I tell them, I haven't consulted you before, but I familiarize myself with your previous records, you have this, this, and this, and that, they feel I know them and I care about them rather than you are just a number. So they feel, because I'm seeing a new doctor and I have to repeat my story again, so that they feel more appreciated. And also for me, I go through if they need this, she needs a smear or they need a blood test. These I'm comfortable about their needs. And one thing, because I dealt with lots of multicultural, let us say, patients, if you learn 1 or 2 words from each language, it really breaks the ice. The other day I had a patient who was Korean. I said, I'm in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia. And I said, oh, you are the first Korean I've seen. So I told her, like in her language, Hamsamanidao and Yapasio. And then she said, oh my God, you know. And she was really over the moon. So it's a bit of each language. It really makes a difference. You connect with the patient.
Yeah. Thanks, Alia, that you make some great points. And I think as a really nice thing to draw from that is really what you're describing there as many aspects of best practice. And I guess in many respects, best practice, general practice, is probably time efficient. You know, doing some of these things isn't just a nicety, it actually does help. It helps the patient in terms of better outcomes, but it makes for a more efficient consultation.
Being in a practice for a long time, when you start, you get a lot more acute things and you can fit everything in and people hear about you, you build up with patients, you get more complex patients. So I think the agenda stuff for me became more and more important.
Absolutely. And I was at a consultation skills session recently, and the quote was made, if you only ask questions, you'll only get answers, which I thought was a fabulous quote, but it was really around if you just sit quietly or reflect back to the patient or encourage them to say some more, and this gets to your golden minute, you'll hear the story rather than just answers to your specific questions, which I thought was great. So thank you very much, Andrew and Tony. Really, really appreciate your time, appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
A real pleasure.
And we look forward to seeing you at an upcoming session. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. We'd love your feedback. Please comment or subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates on new videos. If you'd like to ask a question or suggest a topic, you can contact us via our website at gpsa.org.au. GP Supervision Australia is supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Australian General Practice Training Program.